There definitely is a fork in the road here in terms of how you think about your career. If you're trying to build a long-term, sustainable career, I think you should think about things much differently than if you're trying to have a lottery ticket, right? And there's nothing wrong with if you want to have that binary outcome of the lottery ticket, but you should be honest with yourself about what your goals are and honest with yourself about what the odds are, right? But if you're trying to build a long-term, sustainable career, getting fans to come to gigs and getting fans to actually pay for your music is going to build a foundation much more than any kind of viral hit.
What's going on? Welcome to the New Music Business. I'm your host, Ari Herstand, author of How to Make It in the New Music Business, the book. Third edition is out now everywhere, hardcover, ebook, audiobook. However you like books, you can find the book. Today, my guest is Dan Melnick. He is the general manager at Bandcamp. Now, Bandcamp, of course, is the world's largest online record store. Fans have paid artists $1.49 billion using Bandcamp and $193 million just in the last year. As of this moment, that number is actually updated in real time on the homepage of their website. There are 75,000 records sold each day through Bandcamp, and over 500,000 fans buy something on Bandcamp every month. It's still a powerhouse. It's been around for over 17 years, I think, at this point. And so Dan and I, through this conversation, talk about where Bandcamp is heading, how artists and fans are currently using Bandcamp. I mean, it's essentially a digital download store, but they are selling physical stuff as well. And why it's thriving when, no one's really buying downloads on iTunes anymore. Why is Bandcamp growing, and how is it growing, and how to really think about using Bandcamp and integrating it into your release strategy. And so he gives a lot of really great tips on how to use Bandcamp as part of your release strategy. If you use it already, you're going to learn a lot more on how better to use Bandcamp. If you don't use it, you're not on it, I would encourage you to check it out. One of my favorite features that I didn't mention on the show, but what I actually use Bandcamp and I still use it for and I love, and for Dan and everyone listening to this intro right now, don't ever get rid of this feature because it's my favorite feature. But basically, if you go on Bandcamp, you can search by genre, and there's a lot of subgenres, and then the best feature, search by city. And so finding artists by city, this is a great way to route tours or find support or local support in touring markets. And this was like a feature back in the MySpace days, way back in the day, that I would use in finding, show trades and people in other markets and stuff like that. And Bandcamp, honestly, is like one of the only platforms that still exists that has the vast majority of independent artists on a platform right there that you can search by city. And so I really appreciate that feature. And there's a lot else that we really get into. The industry has been obsessed with, super fandom, direct to fan. This is continuing in my series of highlighting direct to fan or super fan platforms. We had Even on a few weeks back, and I am currently opening the door to any super fan platform, direct to fan platform that wants to come on and talk about how they're helping the music community and help artists connect and monetize that fan relationship, because it's so crucial right now. And yeah, super fan is a buzzword, and he breaks that down, and he looks at it really interestingly and creatively, and we dig into that topic of super fandom quite a bit. So definitely stick around to the very end. He gives a lot of great ideas and really nice ways to think about everything towards the end. So stick around to the very end. Of course, you can find Bandcamp, bandcamp.com. They're also on the socials. They just launched a Substack. If you want to keep up with kind of everything that they're doing and also their new releases, and they highlight journalism, the music journalism they're still doing, the editorial, how they're customizing that. So head over to bandcamp.com, sign up, browse the records, buy a record. And of course, if you don't have your music on Bandcamp, I would highly recommend you put your music on Bandcamp. And then as you learn more about how best to use it, you can use it better. You can find all of us that make the show happen at Ari's Take on the socials. Find me at Ari Herstand on Instagram. My DMs are open. Visit aristake.com, get on the email list. That's the best way for us to stay in touch with you, aristake.com. But right now, if you wouldn't mind, just pause this episode, leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave us a comment, Spotify, YouTube, however you're listening to this, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, all of that stuff. All right, let's kick into the show. Dan Melnick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ari. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. So I'm excited to chat with you today because Bandcamp has been in my life since I was gigging around Minneapolis back in the day. I'm honestly, I think I'm one of the first users of Bandcamp. Like, I remember when it first launched, and Ethan, like, published this blog post about it and didn't really understand what the business model was. And like, I just remember for some reason, I have this vivid memory being at a club, and it's like after the show and all the bands are hanging out and we're talking about, have you heard about this platform Bandcamp? It's like, oh, it's this like download store. It's better than iTunes because it's da-da-da. And we're like all chatting about it. I'm like, oh yeah. And I went on, I've been using it ever since. And it's like, I think it's now like 16, 17 years old or something like that. And but it's gone through many iterations, and it has been in this kind of beloved service in the indie music community since the beginning. And I know that it's gone through these waves of just like, as the industry has shifted, it's just like how artists are using Bandcamp, how fans are using it. I would love for you to just kind of give us an overview of where we're at right now. Like what is Bandcamp? For those, I mean, I'm assuming everybody listening to this knows what Bandcamp is and are probably on Bandcamp, have used it. But give us an update because, it's as the industry is so obsessed with all these other social platforms and streaming services and all of this, I feel like we haven't really talked enough as an industry, and Bandcamp really hasn't necessarily been at the forefront of the conversations, but I know how powerful it's been, and it is. And so just give us an overview. What is Bandcamp? Let's start there. First question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah. So, Bandcamp's the world's largest record store, online record store, right? And
Okay.
It's a marketplace. So it's where fans can directly support the artists that they love. So that means when you buy something on Bandcamp, there might be a label, right? We have a combination of artists and labels, but otherwise there's no one standing in between your purchase and the artist that you're buying from, right? And so it's really about that direct fan relationship and about that very transparent and artist-friendly business model, which says that Bandcamp only makes money when the artist gets paid, right? When they make money as well. And so our interests are totally aligned in that way, right?
Right.
And so what does that look like in practice? You mentioned the roots go back to the iTunes days and selling MP3s. But at this point, Bandcamp's about half digital and half physical sales. So
interesting. Okay.
When you look at our sales mix at this point, a lot of it, again, half it is records, CDs, cassettes, T-shirts, posters, right? I mean, really, artists have figured out that they can sell anything to their fans on Bandcamp and do. And I think we're continuing to see that trend of people realizing, I can sell anything that my artists or my fans really want and have demand for on the platform.
Yeah.
And so if you look at that trajectory and where we are now, Bandcamp is growing. We're still believe that our business model and our approach to the industry is as relevant as ever and kind of timeless in some way. And so, that's sort of a quick version of where Bandcamp's at.
Great. No, that's super helpful. And it's so you call it the world's largest online record store. You mentioned a few things and I've been taking notes here. So you said there might be a label. I know Bandcamp initially started and it didn't allow any major label artists. Is that still the case?
It's not that we don't allow anyone. Anyone can sign up today and sell on Bandcamp with the same terms that an independent artist gets, right?
Okay.
But the way Bandcamp has grown has been very grassroots, right? So we started with artists and then sort of moved our way up to independent labels and bigger independent labels. And if you look at the mix of what's on the site now, we don't have any major label music on the platform, but we do have sub-majors who are choosing to sell on the platform. So like None Such is an example. They're part of Warner Music Group and they sell on Bandcamp.
Gotcha.
And we have, Beggars Group, right? Which is not technically a major, but it's certainly a large conglomerate of independent music, if you think of it that way.
Right.
And then we have, the Merges and Sub Pops or International Anthem, these great independent labels that are really a lifeblood of what Bandcamp has become. And so, I expect that trend will continue, that will continue to sort of go bottoms up, and that, major labels and these other labels will realize, oh, there's something there for me. There's something there for our artists and the way they can connect with fans.
Right. And so you said that Bandcamp is growing. That is, I want to dig into that a little bit, because that I think might be counterintuitive for a lot of people, considering, if you just look at the trend of download sales over the last 20 years, it's just a straight line downward. It's this, if you look at a graph, it's plummeted over the last 20 years to the point of where it's I don't know, 2-3% or something, if that, of the global recorded music revenue. It's like, it's virtually nothing anymore. And it's like, no one really buys downloads via like iTunes as much anymore. So how is Bandcamp growing? And when you say it's growing, is it because of the physical merch sales, because you say that that's half now, or what? How do you measure growth?
Yeah, I'm. When I say growth, I'm talking about sort of year over year, trends in sales. And yeah, you're right that downloads are, a small piece of the global music pie, but they're relatively stable at this point, and I think you'll see that continue because the cohort that's left is using it for a very specific use case, right? And so if you look at the recent data, it's still, the published number is around 800 million yearly. And my guess is that the reality is a little bit bigger because of the data sources of those types of studies for the download industry. And, but yeah, growing for a few reasons. One is the physical side continues to grow. The other is that we continue to bring on new music, right? And so I think the cohort of users who use Bandcamp and who love Bandcamp prefer to buy music on the platform if they can, because they have their collection there, and there's some, continuity there if you continue buying on the platform. And so as we bring on new music, we continue to grow that pie.
Gotcha. You said there's a specific use case for downloads. What are those use cases?
Yeah, so there's a few, certainly. One of the big ones is DJs, right?
Sure.
Still big in the DJ community, and certainly big in electronic music. And you see other platforms like Beatport, right, who really are just even focused in that community. But Bandcamp has a big part of that market as well. And Bandcamp is, I think, increasingly electronic music fans and DJs are actually figuring out that Bandcamp is very friendly because we don't upcharge for different file formats. So most platforms charge more for a lossless file than an MP3. Bandcamp doesn't. And so there's a few reasons why Bandcamp is gaining traction in that area. Then you have your audiophiles and the people who still really care about owning music and having it. And certainly that's, it's a niche audience at this point. I don't think anyone's under any delusions otherwise. But then, a lot of people who buy digital music on Bandcamp aren't necessarily doing it for the utility. They're doing it because they want to support an artist directly. Right. And they see this as a way to do that in a really transparent way, where they know if they give $10 on Bandcamp, that the artist is going to get, $8.50 of that. And that, sure, they get the digital files in return and they can listen to it on the Bandcamp app and be part of this community, but it's not necessarily because they're going to download those files and play them, on their hi-fi system.
Right. And that is, I think, the crux of what we're getting at here, and kind of where the industry is heading is, we have realized that streaming, even though it's wonderful for fans and it's just like a great medium and mechanism for fans to, it's just a great value deal for fans. $12 a month for all the world's music in your pocket. That you can't beat that offer, but it is proven that it is not, it's not really a great thing for artists, in the sense of, especially independent artists, in a way that for fans to support artists, and it's not really sustainable for the independent music community. Historically, artists that had diehard fans could make a living off of 1,000 diehard fans or something that would support them at $100 a year or something like that, and they would buy their records and they go to their shows and buy their merch and all of that. Now, if you have 1,000 fans a year and the only way to monetize that audience is through streaming, it's impossible. You're gonna still, you barely make enough to buy yourself lunch once a year. So it's I think we're evolving as an industry, and it's funny that Bandcamp has kind of ridden this wave from the very beginning, and now we're kind of coming back. The pendulum, I feel like, is swinging back to the other way, where we are in desperate need as an industry, as an independent music industry, and I should say as an independent musician community and musician industry, because the macro music industry is doing fine. The labels love streaming, especially the majors. They have the biggest piece of the pie, and they're doing just fine. And on a macro level, with the way that streaming pays on a pro rata model, and all the money comes in and the money goes out, it works just fine for them, and they're growing, and they love this model. Musicians are not seeing that, and we're not feeling that as, there's so much money being made in streaming, but why aren't the artists seeing that? And it's because there are so many middlemen between the fan and the artist, and then also the artist. We're the only industry in the world that the seller cannot connect with the buyer, and that we don't get the customer's information, and it's fucking wild to me. Like, there's no way, like, no other industry are there that many intermediaries, and like the seller cannot know who their customer is. It's wild. And so, with Bandcamp, what I've always appreciated, but I see this, like you mentioned early on, it's direct to fan, and it's a direct to fan, this like model. And I've always appreciated that Bandcamp, we get our customers' information. I know my fan, who bought the record, who bought the download, and I get their email, which is so huge. It's like customer information, and that's great. So as we're seeing, as the industry is shifting, to this like direct to fan, and like, how are we able to monetize that? And everyone's talking about this. Universal's talking about it. Spotify's been mentioning it. They're trying to roll out a super fan platform later this year. Maybe not. Who knows? But it's like everyone's trying to solve this problem, because it is a problem. And so I'm curious, like, as you're thinking about this, as you know that this is an issue, what is Bandcamp thinking about and doing to kind of lead the way, since you've been in this space for so long?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. And you touched on a few things that I'll touch on, and then get to a clear answer on your last question there.
I threw a lot at you. Yeah.
One of the challenges of streaming, one is that it's one pie that's being divided up, right? And so we saw that most recently for the independent artists with the demonetizing of any track under 1,000 streams in the last 12 months, which basically caused, a bunch of the pie to flow even more to the top of the pyramid in terms of size of artists, right? So it became an even more challenging landscape for independent artists. And I think at that point, a lot of them have been asking these questions. Well, why am I even bothering, right? If I literally get paid nothing, and rolling the dice on exposure is, risky, let's just say, right? That's going to pay off. The other thing is that pie isn't just being divided up against your peers; it's being divided up against the entire history of recorded music, right? And so, when you look at the way that pie is being divided up, you're right. The rights holders who have these huge back catalogs are doing great. And that's because, 70% of the streams go to back catalog. So if you're a new artist, you're not even just fighting over, your portion of the pie with every other artist who's alive. You're fighting with it with every artist who's ever lived and every rights holder, right?
Yes.
Bandcamp's the opposite. So Bandcamp over-indexes on new music. And so whereas, Spotify or streaming services are 70-30 back catalog, we're 70 to 75% new music is where our sales are. And so it's not just about fans directly supporting artists. It's also about our audiences, specifically indexes on keeping up with new music, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a specific mentality and cohort, right? And so to answer your question at the end about what's Bandcamp doing about that, well, I think we're trying to continually put out new product that helps the platform expose the music that's on Bandcamp. So coming really soon, we're going to have playlists in the way most people think about playlists, which is really exciting. Right now, you can make a playlist from your collection on Bandcamp on the mobile app, but it's really kind of stuck there. You can't share it with another person. We can't play it on the web. You can't send it to your friend. That's about to change, and I think that's going to help expose a lot more curation, distributed across the platform from users who are using the platform, every day. Mm-hmm. And that'll also act as an introduction to Bandcamp for people who aren't familiar, because playlists on Bandcamp are a lot more like when you or I used to make a mixtape or a mix CD for a friend, right?
Right.
When we did that, it was because we owned the music and we were, showing our friends what our real taste was, and that we had some skin in that game. On Bandcamp, it's the same thing. It's music you've purchased that you're making a playlist out of. And we're going to try and use that as a funnel to get people to buy music and to introduce them to this notion of supporting these artists directly. And so I'm really excited about that. How is
that just not another like streaming service or whatnot? How does that convert into sales?
A couple ways. One is that Bandcamp, just like when you land on an album page, we have streaming limits. So as opposed to a streaming service, right, where you can just listen to it unlimited. Eventually, we put up you have to buy this now. You can't just listen to it forever. And we're going to use other product tactics to try and nudge people towards that and expose people to Bandcamp's philosophy and ethos. And so, but that's a great question. I think, it's something we're really committed to, and we're going to experiment with and make sure that it meets our needs and our artists' needs, right? We're not interested in asking artists to give music away for free. So it follows the same usage controls and patterns. Artists can set those streaming limits, to be clear, too. That's not even something Bandcamp controls. If you're an artist, you can go into your settings and change that if you want to.
Yeah.
And so it'll be a little bit different experience. And I think we're also, we're going to use all of our platform's knowledge and data to our advantage to help convert people to sales. You're a musician, you understand if you're really getting into music, it's not just about the song and the artist, it's about the producer, it's about the musicians, it's about, if you're listening to a great DJ, they give you context around the track. Trying to get an experience that works more towards that, where it's there's a bigger picture around the music than just the sound.
I love that, and I mean that's something that I've always appreciated is kind of the digital liner notes. Essentially, you've always had liner notes, you've had lyrics, and it's just been like as an artist uploading music to Bandcamp, it's kind of just like a text block there that I can put whatever I want in there, and I've gotten creative in the past and everything. But I found pretty much every artist, this is the place where they can put all their credits, and they can highlight everyone that contributed to the record, whereas not every other service. I mean, it's wild to me that Spotify still does not have full credits. I mean, Apple Music rolled that out less than a year ago, which it's appreciated. But like, it's just nuts, and I hold their feet to the fire all the time. It's just like why they're not, why aren't they giving the trumpet player some love? I'm like, I'm a trumpet player. Like, come on, like what the hell? Or the drummer, or the mixing engineer, or literally anyone. So I appreciate there's been a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom for kind of artists to kind of customize their album page or their single page with that information. But I'm curious, right? At some point, like you said, you have all of this data, and I'm sure you're now seeing kind of how people are engaging with all of it, and what might push people a little bit. Because I've always had the idea, it would be nice if I don't know if this is possible with the text block that you have, but it's like the people that contribute to the records, and if they have contributed to other records, if they're tagged or they're shared, or like, you can jump around and like, this producer produced all these records and this drummer played on all of them. It's like, especially for jazz, it's like, I always want to know, like, what are all the records that Herbie Hancock played on? Not the ones that he's the artist on, but like the Miles Davis records and all of the other ones. And there's like no way to really do that except holding the record in your hand and like looking at the, the record. So I'm curious, like, as you get into the fan experience, because like you said, a lot of the people that engage in Bandcamp are these either audiophiles or just like super fans that just like love music. So I'm curious if like that's part of the conversation as you move forward.
Yeah, what I'll say on that is that better metadata and more useful metadata is something I'm thinking about a lot and having conversations about. Not something I can sort of say exactly what we're going to do with on the product side, but it's something we're thinking a lot about, and exactly in the spirit you're talking about, right? And I think, as it relates to Spotify or other platforms, it just speaks to their priorities, that they've chosen not to do it. They have the data. There's no reason that they couldn't do it. But it's not their priority. And I think, jazz is a great example. But, even, any mainstream rock record or pop record, the producers, the musicians, I think are really under appreciated in terms of the continuity there, right? How I might not just like this artist, but I actually like the sound of this producer, or I like the songwriter, right? A lot of people don't even realize that the person singing is oftentimes not the songwriter,
Right, for sure.
And, at a higher level too, that speaks to the complexity of the industry from a rights perspective, the fact that there's so many people involved in making a record and so many people that oftentimes need to get paid as part of, making a record. So that's another thing that we're thinking a lot about in terms of the future of the platform and where we can go with it, is ensuring that Bandcamp's capabilities mirror the reality of how people are making records. And I think that will help more and more musicians adopt it if it's easier to do things like, for example, split payments, amongst rights holders and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something that a lot of distributors have rolled out because it's just now common practice for indie artists to just, split pay with collaborators, producers, of course, but now just other collaborators, the musicians, mixers, whatever. So that's nice to hear you're thinking about that. In terms of, the community aspect, I've always felt that, you call it a record store, like the world's largest online record store, and it has felt that way, but it's always felt like siloed. And so it's like an artist will have to tell their fans, come to my Bandcamp page. The fan comes, it's very transactional. The fan buys the record. They might leave a little comment or something, but that's all they're able to do. You see their little box under the album that they're a supporter of the album, and that's it. And then it's done. It doesn't feel like there's much community amongst Bandcamp. Is that something that you guys are thinking about? I mean, I feel like it's such a missed opportunity, as in like, you could be a community hub, but it just has never felt like you've ever really prioritized that, or that's something that has been something that has kind of been part of the trajectory of Bandcamp.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think, there's some really interesting foundations there because we have so many great fans and artists on the platform. And there's some features that I would say are, sort of partway there that I want to invest more in. So one that a lot of people don't even realize exists is the feed on Bandcamp, which means you can follow artists and other fans and tags and labels and genres, and then see the purchasing or new releases from those fans or artists. And I use it all the time, but it is kind of hidden. You can see people follow artists on the platform, but then they think they're just sort of signing up for their email list, and they don't even realize, oh, now I can see this whole feed. And then the fan-to-fan thing is cool, but the discovery of other fans is difficult,
Yes.
So finding other people who share your taste isn't as easy as it should be. And then from the artist-to-fan perspective, there's a few things there from like a messaging perspective, but not anything that really brings it all together in a way that feels like, I think community is the right word. Probably my favorite community feature on Bandcamp is the listening parties that we launched almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
Where artists can do a synchronous live stream of their album with live chat. And we're seeing increasing adoption of that with artists and labels. And they're honestly so great. I encourage everyone to attend one if you haven't. And if you're an artist, to give one a shot, because...
How do we find them? Where is there like a listening parties hub?
Yeah, so on the homepage, you'll see a section of Bandcamp live events, and we tend to highlight sort of great up-and-coming listening parties there, and there's a link there that you can see all of the stuff that's coming up. And if you're on an artist or a label's page, there's a little tab that says live, and that has any listening parties coming up for that artist or label.
Got it.
So we're seeing them mostly used around album release cycles. So as another, sort of promotional event. And basically what happens is you all listen to the album together. There's live chat. It's a very engaged community. So they tend to ask really interesting questions of the artists, right? They're asking about the gear being used on the record, or the producer, or, inspiration. So they tend to be these really great interactive looks behind the scene. And then there's, built-in commerce. So you see other fans bought the record. It shows up in the chat. And so you get the little bit of FOMO and social proof to go buy the record. And you can also buy little digital gifts for the artist. So people could buy you a beer, and it shows a little, beer icon, just a nice way to support an artist. And so it's very in keeping with Bandcamp's spirit. And I'll say there is that we're looking to build on that. I think there's a really strong foundation of these few pieces that need some more investment to bring them together into a more cohesive platform, a more cohesive message to fans about here's what you do on Bandcamp, and here's where you can find the community. Here's where you can find the other fans that you are going to resonate with and want to talk about music with. Because as you know, the people who are really into music love talking about music. They love hearing about a great suggestion from someone who has overlapping taste, right? So yes, absolutely on our minds, and something that we're looking to invest more into.
Cool. I love that. And I didn't honestly know about the listening party, so I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds super fun. And it seems like it would be almost like a record release show in a physical space, where that is where the artists sell like the majority of their stock. Their inventory honestly is like at the release show. I would assume it'd be similar there, because the energy is live. The energy is right there. Everyone's talking about it. And then I'm sure, that's a great way for artists to use Bandcamp and to kind of highlight their release. I think every artist should do that. That sounds great. Which brings me to a question. What are some recommended practices for artists and how they should use Bandcamp?
Sure. So, the first most obvious thing is put your music on Bandcamp. It's funny that I have to say that, but what I find when I talk to artists is the risk reward ratio is so skewed in your favor, and a lot of artists are just overthinking it, right? It's like, why wouldn't you put your music on a platform and give people the opportunity to pay you for it? Right. Right. It sounds silly when they put it that way, but it's true. And I think what a lot of artists find is once they put their music on Bandcamp, it starts selling, and it makes their day when they get a sale on Bandcamp. To your point of, in a year, you might be able to buy yourself lunch. In a single sale, you can buy yourself lunch, and in 10 sales or 100 sales, you're having a real impact. Right. Yeah. So first is put your music on Bandcamp. Let your fans make the decision, right? Don't hamper yourself from the start. The second is, depending on the stage you're at in your career, I think in 2025, you need to think about your release cycle in a different way. And what we're seeing is a lot of artists move to windowing, where they're putting their music on Bandcamp first for a period of time before they put it on streaming. And what that's doing is ensuring that their fans who want to support them are like, okay, you can do it, but you got to buy it, right? The people who really want it, put it somewhere where they're going to pay you for it. And we're seeing artists have huge success with that, make more than they would make in years on streaming, really.
How much time is like recommended before it hits streaming services? Are you seeing that they're putting it on Bandcamp?
I don't have enough data to make a recommendation, so I want to say that before I tell you this. We're seeing everything from a week to like 3 months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And what's hard to measure there is, as you know, music is so subjective and aesthetic. It's hard to isolate what the factor is that's leading to higher sales on the platform, whether it's the window or it's the artist or it's even the specific album, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's proving to be really impactful for a certain subset of artists who are, have passionate fan bases and whose fans will buy on the platform. So that's one that I would point to. The other is to, just like on streaming now these days, you put out a single, you put out a single, you put out a single, you release the album. Bandcamp's sort of the same way. You want to have these marketable events, right? Where you have a reason to talk to your audience about, hey, come pre-order this. Hey, come check out the new single. And so you should do the same thing on Bandcamp, basically, Put up the whole album for pre-order, but only have one single streaming to start. Put out another, message your fan base again, put out another, have a listening party, right? This is another great marketable moment in your release cycle.
Yeah.
The listening party is great because that's an exclusive place where they can hear the whole album, right? So if you only have 2 or 3 singles out, then they have to come to the listening party to hear the whole thing before the release date.
Yes.
And then you have the release date, right? And so from a release cycle perspective, I think it's just important to think through that, think through your calendar and how you want to stage that out. And then if you have physical goods that you're selling, if you're selling CDs or records or cassettes or T-shirts, there's a few things that I would say there. One is do it. Again, it's one of these where I understand that it has some upfront cost and there's reasons why there's some risk involved. But if you don't have the things for sale, your fans can't buy them. And T-shirts specifically are a great example. T-shirts are a great thing to do outside of your album release cycle. Right. So if you only put out a record every year or two, if you're an artist, it's a good thing to have another reason to talk to your fans, to have something to sell them in between the album release cycle. So T-shirts are a great example of that. We sell a ton of T-shirts now. If you go to bandcamp.com/discover, you can now just browse the entire marketplace of T-shirts, and it's really cool. I mean, I think it's totally unique in the whole world of e-commerce because where else can you discover a ton of cool independent artists, T-shirts and merch.
Yeah.
Right?
In terms of the T-shirts, just to pause right there for a second, how are you seeing? Do you have any fulfillment capabilities? Do you have any ways that you assist artists in selling it, or are they needing to print up? Do you have any like print on demand features or built-in features or anything like that?
We don't, but it's something that we're actively working on talking about.
Okay.
So right now, we really sort of depend on artists having their own fulfillment capabilities. There are artists already on the platform using merch on demand and sort of doing it in a manual way, right? From copying things over to a merch on demand platform to fulfill it. Or because we have inventory integrations with platforms like Shopify, they might have merch on demand already in their Shopify store, and it's sort of going through that channel. But we're working on more official integrations and making that much easier for artists. And I think it's a great point and something we think about a lot is how can we make it easier and less upfront cost for artists?
Well, and also, speaking of print on demand and fulfillment and stuff like that, I know they used to have kind of like vinyl printing, vinyl fulfillment. What happened with that and why did you discontinue that? And do you have any plans on restarting it?
Yeah, so we do have some plans of reapproaching that problem in a different way. So the way Bandcamp's vinyl service used to work was that it was kind of a crowdfunding model, right? It was like a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding platform. Bands posted their record, artists, our fans came and pledged towards that, and then Bandcamp would deal with the operational stuff to go press it and fulfill it. Anyone who's pressed records knows the operational side is very challenging for a number of reasons. And what we found was that it put us in an odd place in the value chain, but also just the fulfillment chain, and that it wasn't the best experience for fans or for artists, right?
Okay.
And so we didn't feel like it met our standards for user experience, basically, is really why we stopped it. And we have some really cool conversations we're having around that stuff. And I think what you'll see is there will be something in between what we used to do and something new that I think is going to be really exciting for artists and for fans. It's going to make it much easier to sell records and CDs on the site.
Cool. Awesome. So, getting back to what you initially said is put your music on Bandcamp and don't overthink it. I want you to speak to maybe a fear that artists have as maybe a reason as to why they're not putting their music on Bandcamp is because I think a lot of them have been trained that, you know, because the whole industry is obsessed with Spotify and the currency of monthly listeners and stream counts and all of that, and they think, oh, the only way I'm going to get opportunities is if I have like a certain number of monthly listeners or whatever. And then the way to like all of Spotify's recommendations are point your fans here, and if you send more of your fans to Spotify, it's going to trigger all the algorithms, and then you're going to blow up on Spotify because you've now sent 100 of your fans to listen to your album on Spotify. That will trigger all these algorithms, and then those 100 will turn into 100,000 or whatever. Like, that's not realistic, but that's the idea, and that's, I think, why so many artists are afraid to point their fans anywhere else, like a Bandcamp, where they absolutely will, without fail, make way more money if they send their fans to Bandcamp to buy the record than if they send them to Spotify to stream the record. But the hope, everyone's crossing their fingers, is like, well, if I can just get everyone to pre-save my album, and then they go and stream it on the day, and then it triggers the algorithm, and then I'm going to get all the playlists. That's why. So speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, first of all, there definitely is a fork in the road here in terms of how you think about your career. If you're trying to build a long-term, sustainable career, I think you should think about things much differently than if you're trying to have a lottery ticket, right? And there's nothing wrong with if you want to have that binary outcome of the lottery ticket, but you should be honest with yourself about what your goals are and honest with yourself about what the odds are, right? But if you're trying to build a long-term, sustainable career, getting fans to come to gigs and getting fans to actually pay for your music is going to build a foundation much more than any kind of viral hit, right? And I think, I'm sure you've talked to musicians who have had the same experience. Even if you go viral, it oftentimes doesn't mean anything, right? I have a friend who had a big TikTok hit, got a good, solid record label record deal, and went on tour, and like no one came to the gigs. No one really knew who they were, even though they had this big viral hit. It was a kind of transient relationship between their listeners and the music, and it was not, there's no depth there, and there was no real understanding of the artist. It was just a song. And I think it speaks to some of the platform problems you spoke about with Spotify, where if people are really passively listening to music, they oftentimes don't even know who they're listening to. So you could be on that playlist getting lots of streams, and no one even knows who you are, right? For tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of streams, right? And so I think artists just have to be realistic about that and what their goals are, right? And also realistic about the fact that the marketing machines of the major labels are still a huge influence. And as democratic as Spotify and these other platforms want to make themselves out to be, I think the reality is probably a little bleaker in terms of where those streams are going. So I think first thing is, figure out what you want out of your career and your release. And then it doesn't have to be one or the other, I guess, is the other answer, right? It's not just about, hey, point people here, point people there. Part of it is about giving fans choice. And it's really like any other area of e-commerce or anything else online these days. You meet people where they are. And so if you have fans that are already on Bandcamp, let them buy your music on Bandcamp. If you have fans on Spotify, let them go to Spotify. You see this, with Linktree, right? People post links and listen to my album. It's pre-save on Spotify, buy on Bandcamp, buy on my merch store, right? And part of the reality is, if you're the type of person who buys on Bandcamp, you already have a credit card saved there. You're like, oh, I'm going to click that link because I know it's going to be easy and I buy stuff there all the time. Right. And so I think artists have to get into that mentality too of being, quote unquote, multi-channel and meeting fans where they are. And Bandcamp's one of those places, where there's a huge fan base. And again, it's the thing about what's the type of fan that's there. Oh, this is the type of fan who buys music, right? That's this phrase superfan gets thrown around a lot. Those used to just be fans, right? To your point earlier, right? Just buying music. And I get that in 2025, it seems foreign to some people to pay for music that way, right? Like, what do you mean I'm going to buy one record for the amount I could get unlimited, listening in a month? But who would you rather have listening to your music or buying your music, right? That fan is who buys on Bandcamp is more likely to show up to your gigs, the more likely to buy your next record, the more likely to engage with you in a deeper way and listen to your music more and recommend it to their friends, right? And that's the old school social network, the old school virality, right? And I think, I said earlier that I think Bandcamp is kind of timeless as a platform, and I think that's why. And I think everything in technology and things, they go in circles, So what's old is new again. All the labels talking about Superfans after they gutted the whole reason why these regular fans existed, to buy their music.
Right.
Bandcamp is sort of steady at that table and saying, no, this still works. You just got to show up at the table and do it,
Right. It's funny that you're right. The Superfans is the buzzword right now. And you're right. They used to just be fans, because I think that the problem is that we are, as an industry, confusing listeners and fans. And I think they are wildly different batches of people. And I just got into this conversation with Sam Duboff, who's been on the show. He's the global head of marketing at Spotify, and he posted on LinkedIn kind of about how, like, all of these fans on Spotify, they're leaned in and like they're super engaged. And I'm like, but they're not, because the metrics that they're using is just like, first off, he's calling them fans when they're not. They're listeners. And then he's calling them engaged when they're also not. Engagement on what Spotify uses as engaged just means they stream a lot of music, which is not an engaged fan. I think if anyone who's not within the Spotify ecosystem or is an employee of Spotify would never say that an engaged fan is just a random person that streams a bunch of music. They literally hit play once, they put their phone in their pocket, and then the algorithm feeds them shit and they have no idea who they're even listening to. An engaged fan, I think, to normal people is an actual person who loves an artist and is engaging with that artist actively. It is an active thing. So I think like a fan, just a normal fan, is someone who has financially supported an artist, a musician. That is a fan. If you have not financially supported an artist, I don't consider you a fan. You are a passive listener. And so there's a huge chasm here. And this is the big difference, is this like, there's millions of listeners, or you see like, oh, how many monthly listeners do you have? Like you said earlier, they could just be listening to them on a playlist. The algorithm could have fed up a song. They have no idea who they're listening to. They are not fans. And so that's why we see all these times, these like Spotify darlings, like you said, they go out on tour and they can't sell 50 tickets to any one of their shows because they have zero fans, but they have hundreds of thousands of listeners. And like, we have now reached this tipping point where the smoke is clearing and everyone's understanding like this model is not real. Like this is not real. These numbers are fake. These are not real numbers. The way that it's all been set up. So like, getting back to your point of Superfan used to just be fan, which I think is so huge. And and what you hit on is like the goal of what do you want your career to be? And are you looking for that lottery ticket? I love how you phrase that, because do you want to build a sustainable long-term career, or do you want to play the lottery? And that is something that everyone has to think about themselves. So I want to get back onto the kick of recommended practices for artists that do want to build a long-term sustainable career, because you gave some really great tips. I want you to keep hitting them, because it's like, all right, so you put your music on Bandcamp. Number one, you roll out the singles in advance of the album. You have a pre-order of the album. You have a few singles that are available that you purchased, those marketable events, which I love. You have a listening party, which is great. I love that idea. We're windowing the album, so you're going to put it out before it hits streaming services to send people there, send your fans there, rally up around it. Physical merch, great. In between the releases, put some merch up there. Cool. What else? Yeah,
one we touched on earlier, which I didn't mention, is put some liner notes in. Give your fans something else in addition to just the music, right?
Love that.
These are people who want to sink their teeth into it. They want to get a little bit of look behind the scenes. Talk about who played on the record, write a little bit about the recording process. If you don't have liner notes because you weren't going to write them for Spotify because they don't exist.
Right.
Write a couple paragraphs. Just give your fans something else that makes them feel like, oh, this is a little bit of extra information. I think it really goes a long way.
Huge.
The other thing I would say is, learn to market, right? So artists and labels who message their fans more frequently sell more. People are busy.
Yes.
If you're an artist, it can be counterintuitive. If you've worked at a company that does a lot of marketing, you start to see the numbers on a funnel, right? Of email sent to email open to clicked, right?
Yep.
And then to action taken, right? So people are busy. Most people just ignore most things, even if they want to. Like, oh yeah, I'll do that later, right?
Right.
And I think artists sometimes are too passive on this front of like, oh, I sent out that record release email and now I'm done. Like, no, you probably have to send out a few at different intervals with a little bit different framing and engage people, right? Just engage people. And Bandcamp has those tools built in. We have essentially a fan CRM built in where you can message fans. You can do, if you're a Bandcamp Pro or label subscriber, our SaaS subscription, you can do segmentation. So you can target your fans based on their spend. You can target your fans based on their location, right? So if you're going on tour, you can send them a message and be like, hey, I'm going to be in Seattle, and only target fans who've, bought something from you in Seattle, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
So we have those tools built in. And so if you invest in the platform, you get this suite of tools that you can use to understand your fan base and message them. But then you have to take advantage of it. And, one thing I think some of the dialogue around Superfans gets right that I think you can also do on Bandcamp is that people want a little bit look behind the scenes. They want to know about a B-side. They want to know about, hey, we're in the studio and we're going to be working on a record later this year. Just a little message like that will drive traffic to your Bandcamp page and you'll see sales. And so engage with your fan base through the platform and give them a reason to come back and give them a reason to remember that, oh, I wanted to buy that record and I forgot because I got distracted.
Yeah, I've also seen, and I'm curious if you've seen this as a pattern or you have any use cases you want to highlight, but I have used it personally with my own artist project, but also artists that I manage on, unreleased music, putting it on Bandcamp, like demos or acoustic versions or live performances, or just stuff that are limited releases that then you're going to take down, a week later or a day later, or just on a Bandcamp Friday, you're going to have it available or something like that.
Yeah, we see a ton of live records that fit that bill, right? I have a cool live recording, put up some B-sides or some demos.
That don't exist anywhere else, like on the streaming services, right?
Exactly. A lot of that, just to be clear, has to do with your deals, right? And if you're represented or something, that some of that might not be possible. But if you own your rights and you're in control of your destiny there, you can put a bonus track on the version of the album that's on Bandcamp, and it's another reason for people to buy it, right? If it's, hey, here's the regular album on streaming.
Right. Yep.
Exactly. There's so much you can do there when you get creative. And so, I think all of that makes a big difference. And it doesn't have to be just the traditional album release cycle, to your point. And I think that's a really powerful thing for people to do to engage their fan base on Bandcamp.
That's great because, we're in a completely different industry than we were 10 years ago. Whereas like 10 years ago, there were these when streaming, especially, Spotify in the States was still fairly new. It had only been around a few years. And like there was the big conversation of windowing. We are seeing the superstars window, like Adele, Taylor Swift, Coldplay, these famous examples that would window famously, have it available for like sale only months in advance of like when it would hit streaming or something like that. And it was frowned upon, and it just like it wasn't really accepted or just it didn't work necessarily as much for the indie music community because like people wanted to consume music in the way that they wanted to consume it, but also like piracy was huge. Piracy now is virtually non-existent. It's just like we're not talking about that anymore because of the convenience. And so like now that because the argument against windowing before was if you don't put it on streaming services, people are just going to go to the Pirate Bay and upload it, download it, whatever, and they're going to get it. But like that was for kind of the bigger artists, the superstars and everything like that. And it's almost at a point now where like, again, the pendulum has swung back the other way, where it's just ways to take advantage of your fan base, of those who want to support you. And like, you message them, you mentioned the messaging feature, which I have always appreciated, that when you make an album or a release available, it sends out a message to everyone who's purchased or your followers in the past. And so that's been a great feature. And I never thought about, and of like actually marketing through the Bandcamp messaging services like you would normally do with email marketing or something like that. And it makes perfect sense. That's a really great tip. And I hope people will take advantage of that, because like I get it too as an artist. Like I put out something and it's like, all right, I sent them about the album. Everyone who wanted it would have gotten it. And if they didn't, I'm going to annoy them. I don't want to annoy them, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, but I think it's really true. It speaks sort of to the artistic temperament versus sort of, a marketing mind. And it's part of why labels are such still critical infrastructure for artists in terms of having that lens on the world of how to merchandise and how to market. But if you're doing it yourself, I think there's a huge gap between sending 3 emails and annoying people, right?
Exactly.
You can stage them out at some rate and do it and still be well within your bounds of not annoying people.
Let's talk about the business model of Bandcamp. We haven't touched on that yet. And give me some top line numbers. How does this all work in terms of, you said you only make money when the artist makes money. What does that actually look like in practice?
Sure. So on average, artists make between 85 to 90% of any given sale. It depends on the sale and, a few factors. But basically, Bandcamp takes between 10 and 15%, depending on the sale, and there's payment processing. So it hasn't changed ever. It's exactly the same as when it launched. It's totally transparent. If you're an artist, you're getting the same deal that, a label that's on the site is getting. And we think it's transparent and fair. And if you go to the footer of bandcamp.com, we have something we call our fair trade music policy. And that's the spirit of it, right? Is that it's transparent, it's clear. The spirit is that artists create the majority of the value. They should capture the majority of the value. And that there's no sort of misalignment there where, Bandcamp's making money when artists aren't.
Right. And then in terms of like, the price points, which I mean, people that have used it, it's a given. But for those that just have not, talk to me about how albums and singles are priced.
Sure. So we actually just adjusted our suggested digital album price for the first time, I think, ever. So we've been suggesting $7 for digital albums for a really long time. And we just moved this to $9 for a couple of reasons. One is that we had never changed it. And in the time that we were suggesting $7, vinyl records probably doubled in average price because of inflation. Also, charting rules changed. So, we report to charts. And the minimum price for charting in certain territories went up. And so we wanted to make sure that everything was eligible for charting. So right now, $9 is our suggested price for a digital album. That said, we see plenty between 10 and 12, I think is also pretty normal. And if you're a bigger artist and you can command that, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But we should also just mention that it's up to you. Bandcamp doesn't control pricing. We're a marketplace. You control pricing. We sell it. So you can sell for whatever you want. And Bandcamp also kind of pioneered name your price. So a lot of smaller artists or artists who are, feeling uncomfortable can just do a name your price. And they'll probably be surprised by what people actually pay for their album. In addition to name your price.
Well, let's be clear. Radiohead started that off with with In Rainbows. But then Bandcamp, yes, sure. They were a close second, and they scaled it, let's say.
Totally fair. Yeah, absolutely. And, Bandcamp also has sort of an additional fan contribution. So even if you price it at $9, fans can choose to pay you more. And then, so a lot of times, 20 to 25% of our sales, we see fans paying more than the asking price because they want to support artists. So again, this speaks to put your music on Bandcamp. There's people here who are going to pay more than you're even asking because they want to support your music. Right.
I had a fan once pay me $200 for an album, for a 12-song album, just because they wanted to support. Because artists we don't present many ways for fans to pay us, and like artists, like notoriously are really bad marketers and just like bad salespeople for their own music, and they're afraid to ask for money or even talk about money. But you give them this mechanism of kind of pay what you want or pay above the minimum or anything like that. And fans oftentimes will pay more than the minimum just to support.
Exactly. And then, for physical media, there's obviously a sort of a different psychology, or not even just different psychology, but a different reality of you having actual costs, right? So digital music's great because there's no marginal cost to sell another copy. So you can think about pricing a little bit more flexibly. If you're pressing a record, you have that cost in it, and it's really up to you to decide your margins, right? And so, anywhere from vinyl records have gotten quite expensive. So, $20 to $30 is pretty common these days. For a record, CDs, I think, are still a little bit cheaper. So, 12 to 15, I think, is pretty common for CDs. Cassettes are a little all over the place, to be honest. And then t-shirts, people pay $25 to $40 for a t-shirt these days, a really nicely produced one, depending on the t-shirt. And I think there's a lot there for artists to think about. Again, we see artists come off tour and put up their posters and sell through them, right?
Wow.
I think
cool. Yeah, sure.
You have a place where your fans are who and an e-commerce platform. You can get pretty creative. People sell beer koozies. You can sell anything on Bandcamp, really, within the spirit of it. So be creative.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have breakdowns of the difference between how many vinyl records are sold versus how many CDs are sold versus how many cassette tapes are sold?
I don't have the units off the top of my head, but the way you ranked them is correct in terms of proportion of physical media. So vinyl records are the biggest category of physical media, followed by CDs, followed by cassettes.
Okay. And I mean, if at some point you had like a pie chart, it would be really fascinating to see if you publicly release that. It's just like, of all of our physical media sales, 50% are vinyl or 70% are. I just have no idea. And I think like, where you mentioned earlier, half the sales are downloads and half are physical. Like that's really interesting. That's something that I don't think many people would realize. But also you have all this data, and it'd be nice for, Bandcamp to release some of that, which like we didn't even really touch on, and we don't have a ton of time left, but I do want to talk about the curation. And that is kind of also gone in waves over the years. I'm curious where it's at right now. Editorially, blogs were a thing 10 years ago. They were moving culture. People were discovering music through blogs. That was like the driving force in 2012, 2013, 2014. Like we're talking, that is how people discovered music. It's kind of gone in and out of vogue. Bandcamp has kind of held on to this like editorial feature, but I'm curious where you're heading with that and how you approach editorial these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right in terms of the history and the context there. I think we're really committed to music journalism as a part of sort of fostering a healthy music scene. We think that's really, part of the ecosystem is really important. But, if you follow Bandcamp on Instagram or TikTok, you'll also see that we're experimenting there with, short form video, but in the spirit of Bandcamp, these really interesting little looks at scenes or artists in a way that retains our voice, but brings it to these platforms where people are discovering music. Just the other day, Bandcamp announced that we're launching Substack. That's going to have a slightly different format and focus on, a different way of talking about music. And so we're always thinking about that. And I think, in a broader sense on the curation front, I mentioned playlists earlier. I think you're going to see more about those in the future as another way to scale up curation on the platform from a different viewpoint and from a different sort of utility perspective.
Cool. And Bandcamp Fridays, is that being maintained?
Yeah, we just had one last Friday.
And speak to that. What is it for people that aren't familiar with what Bandcamp Fridays are?
Yeah, so Bandcamp Friday started during the COVID pandemic to support artists who weren't able to tour all of a sudden. So Bandcamp came up with this idea to donate 100% of their revenue that day on a Bandcamp Friday, the first Friday of a month, to artists. So waived our revenue share entirely. And it was huge, hugely successful. And even after the pandemic, we realized that it sort of become this almost music holiday and another sort of critical way to support artists. And, Of course, it means we make less money on those days, but we did the math and we realized that we thought it was still worth it, and that it was still, an important show of support for the independent music community. And so we've continued those. I think this year we have 7 scheduled. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's correct, and published throughout. You can already see which ones are happening on which Fridays this year. So it's not every month, but most months. And there's no plan to stop doing them in the future.
Cool. Awesome. And just to kind of close us off, you've already mentioned a bunch of where you're thinking of Bandcamp is heading, and I kind of love the idea and the direction of how you're thinking about all of this. Anything you want to leave our audience with of just kind of how best we should be thinking about it, how to approach, or just like the philosophy or anything that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I think first, I think people will be excited when they see all the product stuff that we're releasing this year, both on the artist-facing tooling, things that will make artists' lives easier and using the platform. Also, the fan-focusing features. We've got some really cool stuff coming. But philosophically, I think Bandcamp is about creating a sustainable career, right? And so going back to that question of who you want to be as an artist or what success looks like for an artist, we want Bandcamp to be the place where you build and maintain that sustainable career with fans who are invested in your career, who directly support you by buying music, who come to your gigs. So if that sounds appealing to you and you want to, create a career around this kind of timeless way of being an artist in music, then Bandcamp's the right place for you. But really, Bandcamp's for everyone. I really believe that Bandcamp is a big tent and is going to continue to grow in this organic and sustainable way. But that more and more people are going to realize, this is not just sort of an ethical way to buy music, but it's fun. At the end of the day, yes, of course, people want to support artists, but also I love music. I love buying music. I've got a big record collection. I did it before I joined Bandcamp. I will continue to do it because I find it meaningful. I find it rewarding. And I want to support artists because I want them to exist, right? It's actually pretty straightforward that if I don't pay them for music and they can't afford to make music, they can't afford to buy gear or go on tour, then they won't make that music. So for me, that's really what it's about. And if you want to participate in that kind of community as an artist, I think Bandcamp's one of the places you have to be online.
Well, it's great. And it's a perfect segue to my final question, which is, what does it mean to you to make it in the new music business?
Yeah, I think it's to have a sustainable career making art that you care about and that you love, right? So it's about being able to express yourself and make enough money to support yourself doing that. I think that's really the bullseye for me.
Dan Melnick, thanks so much. That was great.
Thanks.
Today's episode was edited by Ari Davids with music by Grassroots District and produced by all the great people at Ari's Take.